So, with the benefit of
hindsight, would you have written any of that?
No. I mean, do you look back and just, are you critical, or you think
it's
it was a
hypercritical.
good start?
No. Well, it's a good start if you don't know that Rebus is going to be around for 17 books, because in that first book, Rebus is meant to be a suspect. You're meant to think that he's a locked door in his house that's never opened. You're meant to think what's behind that door, that he has blackouts, he nearly strangles somebody, and you're thinking all the time, this guy is maybe not the hero of the book, but the villain of the book. And I mean, when I was writing the first draft, I think I was very conscious of that there was this kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing going on, that we weren't very sure if he was a good guy or not. And he had the potential to turn nasty. But, thankfully he came out of it the good guy. And he also didn't die at the end, which was very useful to me in later life.
Was it a close thing then?
Yeah, it was very close. I mean, he gets shot in the tunnels underneath here. He gets shot at the end of the book. And I hope I'm not spoiling it for any of you. And I can't find the first draft, but I'm pretty sure in the first draft he did die. I mean, certainly I thought about it. I considered it, because I thought of it as a one-off.
What surprised me going back to it after all this time is I'd forgotten that he was religious.
He is religious. He's looking for answers to big questions. And a few big books in, he goes to a different church every week or whatever, and he's looking for a church that agrees with him, or that he can agree with, and he's never quite finding them. And then 3 or 4 books into the series, he gets friendly with a priest, and they have these arguments about God and the devil and everything else. And then sadly, the priest died halfway through the series in an unfortunate accident. I didn't mean him to die, he just did. And was it an accident? I think it was an accident, I can't remember. But yeah, there was that kind of, and I think that, looking at my old diaries from back then, I mean, I was going through this sort of quasi-religious thing of going to different churches and sitting there and thinking, is there anything out there? But it seemed to me to suit the detective. The detective in his daily life is looking for answers to questions. Why would he then not extrapolate from that and look for answers to the bigger questions? So, I mean, it suited me at the time, and then in later life, when that dispersed, he just stops doing it. Like he stops listening to jazz. Did you notice in the first book he listens to classical music? I'd forgotten that. In the car, he listens to Radio 3. Jesus Christ. See, I just didn't really know him back then. He was just a means of telling a story. He was a fairly two-dimensional character in that first book. There were certain props there. He smokes, he drinks too much, he's trying to forget what happened to him in the past, he has got a past. And then then in later books I got the chance to flesh him out a bit, and it meant that he wasn't just a means of telling a story. That he was more real.
Was it to continue?
It was Ewan Cameron, the editor, who took it for Bodley Head. I mean, God bless him. Because after this I produced a spy novel, Watchmen, which was meant to be a kind of Graham Greenish spy novel. And then I produced a really terrible thriller called West Wind, which I've never allowed to be reissued, which means this library may have one of the only copies in existence. And then, and bless him, Ewan Cameron, back then people still took risks on young writers, and these books were selling in the hundreds. And Ewan just kept going. And then he said to me, I think probably after I delivered West Wind to him, he said, whatever happened to that guy Rebus? I liked him. And that was all it took, was for somebody to tell me they quite liked something I'd done, and I thought, well, I'll have another go then. And then I wrote Hide and Seek, for Barry and Jenkins, which was a very small house publishing house in London that Ewan had gone to, which was then swallowed up by Century, and Ewan retired. And then the guy who set up Century went and set up his own publishing house called Orion, and I went with him. I just drifted with editors and publishers as they shuffled around London. And then finally, when I got to Orion, I stuck with them for the last 15 or 16 years. But nobody knew back then. I mean, nobody knew. I had dinner with Ewan Cameron when we published the final Rebus book. We had dinner in London, and we invited him along, and we were saying that. We just didn't know, we didn't know. I mean, Ewan suspected this was a good character, but he wasn't a crime publisher. He published people like Ronald Frame and Muriel Spark, and he was very keen on Proust. I think he translated Proust. And to give him this kind of hard-nosed, hard-boiled detective thing in contemporary Edinburgh, and, where was that coming from? I mean, you've got to remember, crime fiction back in 85, 86 was still mostly Ruth Rendell, P.D. James, Reg Hill, bit of Colin Dexter. It was still very kind of Middle England. There was some kind of hard-boiled stuff starting to bubble through, but it wasn't selling.
Well, what those publishers did, Bodley Head, then Baron Jenkins, and then what became Orion, allowed you to sort of serve your apprenticeship as a writer.
Which I don't think would happen these days. I really think it's much more like the American model now, where it's not a gentleman's club. It's not, they can't afford to take risks. It's a hard-nosed business, and you need to make it quite early on, or your publisher starts to get fidgety. And how do you get noticed in the first place? I mean, it's the whole game's changing. I mean, thank God I'm nearly out of it. Because I was at the London Book Festival, Book Fair last week, as were you, and all the publishers are saying, we don't know. E-books, are they going to outsell published books? Are published books going to be an adjunct to it? Can they exist together, or will paper books suddenly go? Do we need publishers then, or do authors do deals with agents and Amazon, or Apple, or whoever it happens to be? And just literally nobody knows. It's kind of...